Welcome back, and in this lesson we are going to clean up some of our code, make it look a whole lot nicer. First of all, create a directory called helper, and then within here we can load some helper files. And these helper files we can make use of and we can utilize in order to pull out our data as well as have our returned functionality. So we do have a working application, but there's quite a bit that we can do to improve this application. We can improve the styling as well as tweak some of the functionality. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's grab the data and I'm going to move it into data sim. So this is just a JavaScript file that I've created. So that's sitting within the helper directory. And in order to export out the content that's contained within data sim, we need to specify as exports, give it a name. So I'm going to call it data and the content that we want to assign to it. And that's going to be also data. So there we go. So now we need to bring this back into our index.js because right now we don't have a reference to where it's sitting, as well as we don't have any value for data. So let's set that up. I use const and database, and of course this isn't a real database. This is just a JavaScript file that's going to be holding a variable, and every time our server restarts, we're going to be losing our data. And later on, I'm going to show you how you can actually hook up a database as well to this. So we need to reference where helper is located. So that's actually going to be ./helper. So that's the folder that it's sitting in, and then the file name. So that I can bring all of the contents that are being exported out within this file, I can bring it into the value of DB for database. And then constant data, so that we're staying consistent because we are still looking for the data values. We can do DB data. So that cleans it up a little bit. Let's restart it, make sure that everything is still working properly. So everything is still working. And of course, this is just a variable that's holding within the browser. Even if we refresh, it's not actually holding within the browser, but it's holding within the server. So even when we refresh the browser, those values are going to stay persistent because it's holding within the server's cache. And then if we were to restart the server, that's where we would default back to our original data that we had set up here originally within this file. So the other thing that I wanted to do as well is I wanted to bring that function, and I want to take that function out of our index.js and I want to send it over to the data SM. So let's do that as well. So we're going to grab the whole function, and down here we can paste it in, and then we just need to specify that we're exporting it out. So we can do exports, and we can just name it the same. So get row. And that equals to the function getRow. And we know that within the ID over here, we need to pass in some parameters in order to be able to access and return that information. And there's another value here that we've been using over and over again as well, where we're getting the data users index of. So we can shorten that and place that into helper function as well, and create a brand new function for this one. So we'll just call it find ID and function, so users, and we need ID. So we'll be passing in the user's information, which we're getting from over here. So we've got data users, and we're going to be checking within that data users for the ID. So we need the two parameters, users and ID. And we're going to return back users and finding index of, because we just need to return back if we find it, if we find an ID for it, and if we do, then we return back the value. And if we don't find anything, then all we have to do is we just return back the -1, so if it's not found. So users index of this JavaScript function. And we can use our getRow method that we've got over here. Pass in an ID because it needs that ID value. Let's go back into index.js. And now we can clean up some of our files here as well. So make this a little bigger. Do a beautify. So our data is still data. We're still using body parser. We're also taking in as JSON body parser. And over here, we're still setting that default address for our public files, so that that's a static value that's not going to change. So the get users is still functioning. We're still pulling back and returning back all of the data information. So this one now, because we're using the get row method, the get row function, all we need to do is add db in front of it, because it's no longer sitting within our file, it's sitting within the db object, which is the return values from data sim. And we'll just make sure that we can still see the user's information, so that's still coming in. And we'll go through the other routes as well, just to make sure that everything is still working properly and make updates where needed. So in this one, we can use our brand new created function, that find ID function, find ID, so that we can make use of it, and find ID. So let's go back into index.js, and let's make use of that function. So we can return back the ID values. So we can do let ID equals db find ID. So that's that brand new function that we just created that's sitting within the helpers file. We need to pass in the data users because it's expecting two parameters. So it's expecting data users, and it's also expecting the request parameters ID. So we'll pass both of those in there, and that should return back our ID. And let's get rid of this stuff for now. So make sure everything is working properly before we continue. So we're going to refresh. We're going to try to do an update and a save. So we're getting the ID of 0. Let's try to edit number 1. Save. We get an ID of 1. So we're actually returning back those IDs that have been specified and created of where they're actually sitting within the array. And we know that within data users, so we're returning back what their index is within the array. So the next thing that we want to do with that is we're going to bring back that stuff that we just removed out. And we're going to be checking to see what the value of ID is. We can get rid of this because we've done a lot of that functionality. So we're checking to see if the value of ID, because we're setting that over there, is -1. Is not -1, so that means that we did return back an ID, that it was found within the array, that it did have a value. Temp now becomes ID as well, and instead of temp over here, we'll just update it to ID. So there we go. So let's go back out here and try this out. So edit and save, and we'll see what happens. So we see that right now we've been able to change those values, and now we're seeing those new values that are being output there. So put is working. And the last one that we need to update and fix up is delete. So because we did change again that we added in that helpers function, and we don't need this value anymore. So we can use the same function over here as we did for ID that we're grabbing to find out if ID exists within the array. And if ID is there, then what we want to do is we want to splice it out, starting in position ID, because we did return back that ID value, and then we just need to specify that we've deleted that value. And the value that we're actually deleting is going to be this one here. So let's go back out and refresh it, and we'll try, so we'll add that one in, and we'll remove one of our other ones, and then we can remove this one as well. So everything seems to be working, and now this is how you can add in a helpers file in order to clean up your main application routing. So you can do this for the routing as well. So there's a number of options to really clean up your main JS file so that you don't have too many things happening there. And this can even be cleaned up probably even a little bit more. So you can clean it up even more if you want. And right now this is functioning just as before, but we've added in that helpers function. So next, let's clean up our index.html. So that's coming up in the next lesson.